Hey guys, Mr. Breen, and I'm going to talk to you about how to draw production possibilities curves, what they are, and so on. Let's go back to the previous example that we used with Xander and Willow on their desert island and they're collecting fish and coconuts. So if you wanted to graphically represent the maximum production that Willow could have, you could put it in this form that you see over here. So Willow can either produce 16 coconuts or she faces a series of trade-offs, so she can produce, let's say, 2 fish and 12 coconuts. And the series of trade-off continues all the way until she gets to 8 fish, 0 coconuts. Notice she could produce anywhere below this line if she wanted, but that's not very efficient, right? If she produced 2 fish and 6 coconuts, she could produce another 6 coconuts without losing any fish, or she could produce another, looks like 3.5. Is that right? Oh no, sorry, 3 fish without losing any coconuts. So that's not very efficient. Everything under the line is a possible point that you could produce, but it isn't very efficient. On the line, this is the maximum you could produce. Here, the maximum Willow could produce, and it's the most efficient thing. She can't produce out here. That's beyond her abilities, but she can produce anywhere here or in here, just not very efficient. Because this line represents the maximum level of production, usually, often it's called the production possibilities frontier, or PPF, and I'll write that, PPF, if you can make out what I wrote. We can also do this with Xander. We can say, well, he can produce 4 fish and 0 coconuts, or 10 coconuts and 0 fish, or he can produce somewhere in between. For example, he could produce 5 coconuts and 2 fish. Here again, Xander can produce anywhere underneath this line, but it's not very efficient, right? He could be producing more. If he's underneath this line, he could be producing more. He can produce up there, that's the most he can produce, but out here, he can't produce that. So his PPF is right there, PPF, maximum level he can produce. Now, we could also combine Willow and Xander's production possibilities curves together. So if both of them together only produce coconuts, they'll produce 26, and of course no fish. But if they decide to only fish, they could produce 12, and assuming they don't produce any coconuts, or they could produce somewhere in between. But this is assuming that they don't trade. This is just adding together. If they have half of their production on each one, then they're going to be sort of halfway up here, but they're not trading with each other. So it's not as efficient as it could possibly be. Both of them could be better off. Now, before we go on, I want you to notice something that's going to be important in the next slide. So Xander's slope the slope of his production possibilities curve is 2.5. That's because for every fish he gets, it costs him 2.5. It's actually negative 2.5, but I'm just going to erase the negative because it doesn't matter for our purposes. And for Willow, the slope is 2, because for every fish she gets, it costs her 2 coconuts. That's why her lower slope means she has a comparative advantage in this, and Xander's higher slope means he has a comparative advantage in this. Now with trade, we can take advantage of those different slopes, because together the slope is, well, I just took 26 coconuts and divided it by, this is the rise, and divided it by the run of 12 fish, and 26 divided by 12, it turns out, is 2 1/6, or 2.16 repeating. I just said 2.17. Okay, but we can do a little bit better than that. We can start off by having only Willow make our fish, because she has a comparative advantage in that. Her slope is only 2. So this line descends a little bit more gradually. We can produce more. Okay, and then once we get to this point where she's caught as many fish as she can, 8. Now we get a little hitch, and we have to use Xander's slope of 2.5 all the way until we get down to 12 fish. So really, the production possibilities frontier is right there. It's that little hooked thing that's actually better. It's better because it gives us more production possibilities, right? If this black line, this no trade black line is our maximum, then we're limited to what's under that line or on it. But now we've opened up these options in here, which are a little bit better. So it may not be a whole lot better, but it's at least better, and everybody's a little bit more well off. All right, so I'm going to play around with this by adding another person who actually has a different trade-off. So for Cordelia, our new person, she can either do 4 coconuts or 4 fish. So That raises our maximum coconut production possible if we totally ignore fish to 30, and our maximum total fish production to 16. And because Cordelia's trade-offs are this way, because each fish only costs her 1 coconut, whereas it costs Willow 2 coconuts, and Xander it would cost 2.5 coconuts. If we start to produce fish instead of just doing all coconuts, then we're going to just have her do that first, and we're going to use her trade-off of 1. That's the slope. And then if we want to produce more than 4, which is her maximum production, then we'll get Willow involved, and she'll produce a few. And if we want more than 12, then, which is because Willow's maximum production is 8, Cordelia's maximum production is 4. So if we want more than 12, we're going to then start to bring Xander in. Notice that another person, even though she's really worse than Willow or Xander overall, because her comparative advantage is still different, we can still use her to increase maximum production a lot. So now we have all of these spaces that we didn't have before. And if we add another person who it turns out is really, really good at collecting coconuts, way better than Xander, but is still actually pretty much worse than everybody overall. So he can either collect 1 fish all day or a total of 5 coconuts all day. So if we add this person in, let's say we start by making all coconuts. So now we can make 35 coconuts total, or we can do 17 fish total if we wanted, but let's start with the 35 coconuts. Well, obviously the first person we're going to have collect fish is Cordelia, because her opportunity cost per fish is the lowest. So there we go. And if we want more than 4 fish, we'll have Willow do it, do all the extra, and so we'll have her do that until she's maxed out. And then if we want more fish than 12, we'll have Xander get into the mix. And if we want more fish than 16, then we'll get Angel involved, and he'll make the rest, which is really, he can only make 1, but that'll get us to our 17. So notice again that trade has made us this much better off, and the more people I add, the more obvious it is how much better off we are. Now, eventually, if I add, tens and tens and dozens and millions of more people, this is just going to look like a curve that sort of bows out. And the reason why it's not just a straight line is because of those returns to trade, because we can take advantage of people's different opportunity costs for different things, and the fact that everybody has a comparative advantage in some different thing. Now, forget about why it's all bowed out. How can I make this curve move out? Because right now, this is the most we can possibly produce. Well, this is maybe a pretty poor lifestyle for these people, so how can we have everybody produce more? Well, the only way we can get more production is by having more of the factors of production: land, labor, physical, and human capital. Well, our labor is pretty fixed. With 4 people, that's how many people we have. But what if we make everybody a little better by giving them some skills and education? Or what if they spend some time making physical capital, making tools that actually make them much more effective at all of these things? Notice all of the economic concepts we've talked about that are basically shown by this production possibilities curve. We have scarcity, which says, this is the maximum production we have of coconuts, or this is the maximum production of fish, and this line represents the maximum production of everything that we could have because our resources are limited. It represents trade-offs. Okay, the more fish we want, we have to give up, for every fish, we have to give up some coconuts, right? And, because of trade and specialization, we can get some advantageous trade-offs, better than we could without trade, but we still have to make those trade-offs. It also shows us efficiency. If we produce at a point underneath this line, we're not being very efficient. We could do better, and we want to push ourselves out to that line.